And good morning, everyone, and welcome to Political No Brainer, the podcast where we move past winner takes all politics and into real conversation. Today, I'm really appreciative to be joined with Chris Engel, the host of the Philosophical Angle podcast. He is incredible at breaking down complex issues and really looking at them in a philosophical way. We're in a point in time in today's history where there is no compromise, whereas if compromise comes about, it's perceived as a sign of weakness. And we were talking briefly before, but Chris, I want you to jump in and introduce your podcast and talk about how you break it down.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the subject of the perceived problem of not being able to, of today's politics being more acrimonious than in decades before. And the acrimony, the will to be able to politically compromise, fluctuates like all of life fluctuates in its ups and downs, just like the stock market fluctuates up and down, but it all depends on the amount of knowledge that comes in. For example, in the stock market, as knowledge comes in about political situations or economic situations or corporate profits, as the knowledge hits the market will respond accordingly. If company profits are not very good, they go down. If the political situation, like an oil situation that we presently have, the stock market will go down. When things become better, corporate profits go up, so it's all based on knowledge. And this knowledge, when it hits individuals, then the individuals respond. And this is no difference. So I don't believe that today or presently that there aren't analogous situations in the past. I believe there have been. But you're right, Jeff, that the amount of political acrimony is right now at its peak. And it basically comes from, there are 7 dictums that dictate the left and 7 for the right. And I think that we can have that if we explore principle number 3, and we'll see that why there is a lot of political turmoil in present day news. And that dictum is that the halves of world history, the kings and queens, and the leaders and those who had totalitarian power, were up against the have-nots, the proletariat, the slaves, the worker bees, and they were the downtrodden. And that's the way the world was for the last 5,000 years. And then suddenly that all ended suddenly. And what happened is that there were a couple revolutions that changed everything. And one is the American Revolution, and one is the French Revolution. And these guys, they came up and they revolted and won. One of the first times in all of history that a revolution was successful. There's only been a few. But this was successful, and it did something to the haves that was just terrible for their situation, which was that democracy, voting, they had to convince people, the have-nots, to vote for them. And so now they have to convince. And so the same is true now. Both parties have to convince the people to vote for them. And but there are 2 outlooks, and according to this principle number 3, there are 2 outlooks, and one outlook is that the left will tend to look at an individual's nature and his and what he is like inside, and determine that it's basically negative, that his nature is no good. And it's got a biblical stance to it. We all fall short of the glory of God. So, and they feel that man's nature is no good, and so he needs to be controlled. We'll look at somebody and think he does fall short of the glory of God. He has a negative outlook. He is corrupted. He is bad, but there are points within him that are good, and that has a biblical origins also, like in Romans 6. Paul says, hey, we're bad, but that doesn't give you permission to be bad. You have to be good. So the conservative will look at somebody and feel that there is some goodness within him, and he'll try to take that goodness, for example, with the left, and they won't like his ideas, but their ideas, but they'll take a look at see where there is some good within those ideas, and they'll try and work with that and compromise and use it to promote laws and regulations and help bring society more to become fluent in being able to produce goods and services, and which we need to do to bring us up from misery and bring us into goodness. So what happens is that you've got one side feels that you're not so good, and the other side says, well, we're gonna find out your ideas that are good, and we'll try and come to a compromise. And that's how politics works. But what happens is that, and that's why, because the one side will look and doesn't want to compromise because you're bad. Your inherent nature is no good, so we don't really want to compromise with you at all. But the other side is, well, there must be some good ideas within what you believe, and we'll try and pick those and work with them. And that's the reason why compromises tend to go little by little to the left. And and if you look at the world governments throughout the world, they tend to move little by little to the left. And so what happens is that when somebody comes in and try and drag it back and to where it was before without compromise, and go back toward original conservative principles such as we have now, you're going to get huge amount of acrimony, argumentation, no will to compromise, because it's being dragged back in one direction. And we've seen that before in history. Look at Ronald Reagan had the same problem. He brought conservatism and he dragged it back, and boy, did the press, it was just like today. It was a very little difference. Times of lesser acrimony was maybe John F. Kennedy, although later on, his subsequent inheritor of his policies, Johnson, did have tremendous acrimony because of the rise of the will of the people to be against the Vietnam War, because it was unsuccessful. And so society started to realize that they can't compromise on that point, and they dragged it back. And so the acrimony in that time was as great as anything is today, with all the riots and consternation of really both sides against the Vietnam War, because they were stuck with in promoting the policy of continued war, and people became more conservative and didn't want it anymore. And suddenly Nixon came in, and his policies also were very contentious. And so at that time also, there was tremendous political divide. And so that's all due to what I call that dictum number 3. And as far as I can figure out, the haves and the have-nots politically in their minds basically are about 30%. For the Democrats are basically 30% of a hardcore percent of the population, and the conservatives are basically around 30% of the hardcore conservatives. And so they will not be moved by whatever argument you've got. They're staunch supporters of their particular side. But what happens is that, so everybody tries to convince the independent voter in that middle. And those are the ones that decide elections. And those are really the ones that also decide how much contentious arguments are to be made, because those are the ones that have to be convinced to vote for them. And so that's what I believe is how we answer your question about how volatile is the political scene today.
And that's incredible way you just placed it. Let's start with Ronald Reagan. There's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with Ronald Reagan. When he first became president, his own team, Republicans, had extreme concerns about him. And then there was that whole pushback from the left that said he's entirely too right. And then, like you said, there's those middle who said, give the guy a chance. With Donald Trump, it's been squashed. Whether any dissension towards his policy has been squashed. It's been called Trump derangement syndrome. I've called it TSDS, Trump supporter derangement syndrome. It's okay to say a guy is wrong. It's okay to question a policy, But now we've got this absolute determination that we are going to defend this man no matter what. And there's some, and so when you talk about how it was before, about how you said generally things lean, generally the compromise leaned towards the left. And over time, like I was saying before, before this, there was a lot of compromise that leaned towards the left. I agree. We grew the New Deal in a big way over the course of the inception of the New Deal till 50 years later. We grew it in a big way. And there was always that feeling of, you, like you said, that 30% extreme conservative who said, it's just gone too far. And every week you went further. And I think where the real inflection period came was with the Affordable Care Act. When we could no longer come to an agreement, we had the power to do it on our own. And that was an issue. That was really where we expanded, meant we created this whole new social program that was probably economically in measure and size bigger than the whole New Deal. And that was the end of it. And then came the idea of a guy that's going to squash the Affordable Care Act no matter what. It's just in his genes. It's maybe his nature to be vindictive. He didn't like Obama, whatever. They were convinced he was a guy that could once and for all squash at least this one big giant program. And he hasn't been able to. There was enormous protest all across the country because essentially, for the most part, the ACA works. But so when you come to this logic of the compromise is always leaning towards the left. It really was. Ronald Reagan once posted a video many years ago, I think even before he was in politics, he talked about universal health care. He said, don't give the liberals a finger because they'll take a hand and then an arm and then a leg and then they'll take everything. I mean, it was a video that I think they took it down since then, but it was addressing the idea of the Affordable Care Act just being a start. And then comes the issue of why don't we have universal health care? And so it did. He was right. They haven't been able to accomplish it, but so it did. So when you talk about, just like you unpacked it, is there any realistic way to believe that we're ever going to get back to a point where there isn't so much dissension amongst each other?
No, because the idea of goodness is inherent within that 30% of each side. And the goodness of the Democrats is control. That's their ultimate goal, is further control of the human species, because they know that the humans need to be controlled because they're inherently bad. And this is the idea of communism, that the population needs to be controlled and needs to be guided because they're inherently bad. And so otherwise you'll get people rising up out of the have-not class and enter into the bourgeois, and suddenly you've got rich versus poor, and this needs to be quashed. And so what happened, so totalitarianism tends to rise because of the idea that the other person is bad, and so they need to be controlled. And so a conservative comes along and says, well, no, we don't need to be controlled, because freedom is that which produces goodness and wealth and profit and goodness. And when we have freedom, we're able to freely produce goods and services and bring us up away from misery. And that's the purpose of freedom, because freedom allows the individual to make priorities in his mind. And I'm defining freedom actually right now. Freedom is the making of a priority in your mind and then effectuating that priority into reality. And that is freedom. And when you effectuate, and as people, your populace and as voters will use their freedom to do what is good for them, which is dictum number one. All life does that which is good for them. And so freedom is the promotion of the individuals of society to make their own priorities and effectuate them into their lives, and when they do this, they're doing it because they want to be free. They want to do that which is good for them. And so when they do that which is good for them, they are happy. And why are they happy? Because the effectuation of these priorities generally bring efficiency into their lives. In other words, they'll get more for less, because all of economics is governed by the individual transaction. And so the human will make a transaction and he'll start with his sacrifice. And he sacrifices his risk, his time, his effort. He'll use his knowledge in an atmosphere of risk to produce something. And that's called a sacrifice. And what he does with that is he seeks a reward for this sacrifice. And so the sacrifice equals a reward. And when the sacrifice is small and the reward is large, that's called motivation. And he takes advantage of that efficiency that he brings in, because maybe he invented, I don't know, any of the famous inventions all throughout history. And maybe some guy comes along and invents the telephone, and suddenly everybody can communicate easier. And this brings a tremendous efficiency into society. And thus the inventor was able to sell that and profited from it. And he made goodness for his life and brought himself up away from misery and brought others into the realm of goodness also. And so he does it by making the transaction, which is formulated, which is initiated by freedom. And so now there are two ways to look at society, and the arguments from a conservative to the liberal all go. One goes for control, and one goes for freedom. And this back and forth is the nature of political talk. And so when society goes, as per Dictum 3, goes little by little over to the left, and someone goes, no, we got to stop and bring it back. That's called a mini revolution. And it's dragged back, and you have a revolution, and suddenly it's just like the American Revolution, the French Revolution. They're bringing you back into conservatism. And so that's why the contentions go up and down. The more that there are some good little policies that come to fruition that maybe the left come up with, and like universal health care. Okay, that's a good idea on the surface, but does it really bring an efficiency into society? And so that's a big argument. And so the right will take a look at it and say, well, this kind of sounds good. I mean, everybody should have health care. Okay, so how do we do it? And then there's a huge argument about it. And then eventually you might see that, well, a total health care provided by the government is not so efficient. That's inefficient. And so the argument goes, and they drag it back and say, maybe this is not the right road to go down. And then you end up with little parts of one and little parts of the other. And that's the political conversation that goes on. So, but when somebody comes in and does a mini revolution and drags it back, well, it's a war. And that's what happens.
Well, you've just so clarified so many things that weigh on my mind every day, simply because there's always this feeling of guilt I have because I find I can't communicate with Democrats, but I can communicate with Republicans, and I identify as a Democrat. But the fact of the matter is, and I'm going to give you real life examples, is, they call them rhinos in the Republican world. There are no Republicans in name only. Republicans are generally more open-minded. They should have dinos. The minute you say, like I've said to Democrats, maybe there should be an entitlement reset. Maybe we need to rethink that a little, to give everything free. And I looked at Bernie Sanders as not a success story. I looked at it as really a sad story. The 12 million young people gave up all hope of succeeding with the American dream and submitting to socialism. Young people used to be the ones that wanted to be the next Elon Musk. And I'm not building Elon Musk on a pedestal. But I'm just saying, young people used to be the ones that wanted to succeed. They wanted to buy a big house. And then comes Bernie Sanders. What does he call himself? A socialist, but he calls himself a proud socialist or something. I forget what term he used for himself. And I don't want socialism in America. And I've told Democrats, stop with the universal health care bullshit, because it won't work in a country this size. And it simply doesn't work in even smaller countries. People are waiting for simple procedures for 8-9 months. And the discomfort and the fact that simple procedure can turn, the fact that the need for that simple procedure can turn into death on the waiting list is not what you want in America. And it's going to be significantly worse because we're a bigger country. And I've said the acronym is wrong. The ACA shouldn't be the Affordable Care Act, because at times it's not affordable. It should be the Available Care Act. It's always available. No matter what happens in your life, you can get a price on healthcare based on your age and gender. They won't say, oh, you just got diagnosed with a brain tumor, it's $1 million a year for the policy because we'll only spend $500,000 on coverage. No, it fixed that. So and I tell Republicans, hey, how about we just settle down? Let's just stop attacking the ACA. Let's just fix it a little bit. Let's fund the high risk corridors. Let's increase the subsidy. A lot of them embrace the idea. But if you say that to a Democrat, they'll run you out the back door in a room saying, we need you to have health care and you're an idiot and get the hell out of our face. And so I really see what you're saying when you say Republicans embrace some of the ideas that we offer, and it happened in COVID. In COVID, I said to people, look what's happening in New York City. The people that are quarantining are getting COVID at a higher rate simply because the buildings are so big, they're breathing recycled air. The whole idea of quarantining is a problem. Stop enforcing it. Let them walk out in the parks. And where Donald Trump sort of got a sort of feeling of absolute love from the conservatives is when he said to churches, if you want to congregate, congregate. The Democrats said no congregating at churches. And it was like, this is political suicide. These people want to meet their friends in church. We cannot control that. And we understand the consequences. But they never presented the consequences as the individual getting COVID. They expressed the consequences as the individual spreading COVID to the rest of the individuals. And it wasn't so, really. It was not that contagious. There was not such a need for such a draconian program of quarantining. I mean, I had no job. I got laid off because of COVID. And we walk in the park and even the public bathrooms are locked. And it's like, I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, what is the difference? We're out in the park. I mean, and so I totally understand now where the state, where a lot of conservatives literally don't have disdain for liberal policy. They have disdain for liberals. And
So you just defined really the difference between a liberal and a conservative. You talked about the need for freedom in society, be able to combat COVID, and then the will to, on the other side, to control individuals to the point of quarantine, which was bad for society. And so that is the very core of the argument, freedom versus control.
and the whole idea of everybody has to be vaccinated. Everybody. And people are like, I don't want the vaccination. And there was examples. One of them was a friend of mine. He didn't have the vaccination. He ultimately got the Delta coronavirus. He didn't even think he was going to make it. He himself said, I was wrong. It doesn't change the fact. He posted on Facebook, I was wrong. I should have got the damn vaccination. It doesn't change the fact that it was his choice. It should not be forced on him. The indoctrination of the vaccination was the issue, not the vaccination. The idea that if you don't get vaccinated, you are this terrible citizen, and the conviction. And then they had all these slides and these scales, and we're beating the curve here, but we're not beating the curve here. And the reason we're not beating the curve here is because the majority of people haven't been vaccinated, but it still should have been their choice. And Democrats stood on this high horse and really lost all credibility. And that it may not have been the Affordable Care Act that was the inflection period. It may have very well been COVID, where the whole country shut down. And I remember we were in Florida, and when the state reopened, we were like, oh my God, this is wonderful. Let's just get back to life. Let's see what happens. I don't know. I may actually, for the first time in a year, walk back through the shopping center and get hit by a car. But you know what? At least I can walk back into work. I can get out of the house for 6 hours without wondering what other TV show is left to be watched. And they just really decimated my entire life for a whole year. I forgave them, but the truth is, some people don't forgive them. Some people still talk about all these things that they've mastered at screwing over the pooch really hard. And I understand now more than ever, because I just recently walked into a Republican campaign office, and I felt more welcome there than I did every time I've ever walked into a Democrat meeting. I've always felt like I was the outcast, because I'm a center right or a moderate or something. I do believe in championing the vulnerable. I don't believe in everything free. I don't believe if everybody has free college, right? It's kind of like when Jim Carrey was God and everybody won the lottery. Well, then the jackpot was only $1 each. It's kind of like if everybody has free college, well, everybody's applying. I got college. I too have 4 years degree. Well, then you're up against the same thing. So I never really looked at it this way. I'm really glad I had this conversation, because in a sense, I don't think Republicans have a chance of great success under Donald Trump. But I think if they modify their approach, I might even run as a Republican candidate someday. But I mean, you just can't work with it. I mean, when I think of Antonio Ocasio-Cortez, and I never use the acronym because I always think of it as another obnoxious child, not her actual name. And it's like the things she presents. She swears like she presents like she's taking this oath of poverty and she's living a life of luxury. You know, you literally have your own private public transportation system to work. You're literally working in, you see, your house cafeteria is like a five-star restaurant. Stop talking like we all need you to provide us with free housing. The only free housing that's being provided is to you. And the only worthwhile free housing, the only worthwhile free benefits is being provided to you. But do you have any feeling of how we get back to a sense of reason in America? How we get more? Because when we talk about Ronald Reagan, there was Reagan Democrats. There was a love for Reagan.
Yes. And there was a love for Reagan because he presented the feeling, the policy of greater freedom for society. And so his following was tremendous because, one, he brought more freedom to society by reducing regulations, and the effect of it was greater prosperity. And with the greater prosperity came a greater following, and he was very successful because more goodness was brought into society. And the reason why goodness why goodness flows into society is from greater knowledge being produced. And the reason why totalitarian or control of society, like during the COVID era or any other area historically, when control is brought in, you have less amount of freedom. And when you have less amount of freedom, you'll have less prosperity eventually, because control is the oppression of freedom. Because I remember when I talked about priorities, your creation of a priority and making it, and then effectuation of a priority. Those priorities are bits or bytes of knowledge. And when control is brought into society, then the effectuation of those priorities are limited to the priorities of a few, which control society. And when that happens, you get less knowledge in society. And when you get less knowledge, you get less efficiency, you get be brought into, and this was discussed by the philosopher Hayek. And he explained, because knowledge is now concentrated in the hands of a few, and the few cannot hold as much knowledge as the entire population of a society. They will have more knowledge. And so societies that are controlled, the more societies are controlled, the less they are prosperous. And the more freedom they have, the more prosperity comes in. And that's why Reagan was popular, because freedom came into society, it produced more goodness, and the stock market took off, and people were happy because they were prospering. And the same is true now. Trump is doing the same thing, bringing less control into society, and because of it, for example, less control by taxation. He's the big beautiful bill, decreased taxation, and taxation is a type of control. And so that will bring greater freedom and greater prosperity. And I think the stock markets are just about to come back and indicate that by hitting new highs. And so,
Well, when you say hitting new highs too, but we're also in a tumultuous time, and the stock markets haven't plummeted because they have the money cushion to sustain the tumultuous time because of the tax breaks they've gotten too. And then we're going to see that prosperity. Hopefully, we can get out of Iran. Hopefully, we can get onto some sort of compromise. Another thing you said is when you think about control, and I've always thought our education system is too controlled. But I've also thought that we need to, through knowledge, it's like you said, through knowledge, we would have more success, right? And if we open our minded about our education system, I've always thought we should have Montessori's as a public education part, as a part of our public education system. Some kids would do very well in that. Whereas when they go through the dictated K through 12 system, they don't really succeed because it's not for them. And there was another example of education control, and I use it almost to be funny, was an argument in the Supreme Court. It was Mahmoud versus a school district. And the Democrats were basically saying kids could not opt out of a certain class. I'll tell you. So the class was a reading of certain books. And it was basically like little Johnny has two daddies and stuff like that. Kids could not opt out of these classes. It would just throw the whole schedule into a tailspin. But the right showed how this same school district was allowing choir kids to opt out of singing certain religious songs. And it didn't just throw the whole system into a disarray. And it's like, that's the control. Does my child really? I wouldn't mind if my child went to that class, but some people did. And the Democrats argued absolutely not. No one can opt out of these particular classes. And even the liberal justices were like, what's the issue? And ultimately, the Democrats lost the case. I think it was Keegan who even argued, what's the issue with opting out of these classes? I don't understand it. And they are presenting a better argument that kids are opting out of other classes for other reasons. So
Freedom always reigns supreme.
freedom reigns supreme. Now, when it comes to taxation, I don't think what we're bringing in revenue is the issue in America. I think what we're spending on war is the issue in America. Well, for 50 years, we've been at wars. And they've always argued the point that China's been at peace for the last 50 years. And that's why they're so economically advanced than us, because they haven't had the expense of the wars we've had for the last 50 years. So if we would just convince politicians to sort of get out of this business of war every week, we could save a lot of money and reduce taxation. That's been my argument on both sides. Whereas Democrats just want to tax everybody. Republicans are like, we're just taxing too much. We're really not looking at the real issue, which is a problem, another problem of American policy and politics.
Okay. Yep. Again, you're demonstrating the battle between control and freedom.
Right, right. And you've just made it clear for me, which is really beautiful, because I could definitely use some clarification on a lot of topics. And that really did I'm really glad we had this conversation. And I'm looking forward to having it again. But what do you see in the next cycle? Okay, let's talk about the control thing, because we got a few more minutes. What do you see coming out of this? Do you see any positive, or are we going to just elect Gavin Newsom and Angie Ocasio-Cortez as his vice president and go in the exact opposite direction this time around?
You talk about predicting the next election?
Yeah, and what'll happen? Well, just predicting the next few years in America, and the next election, of course, being a part of it.
America is going to prosper greatly because Trump has increased freedom. So corporate profits are going to do well with less taxation, and individuals are going to do very well. And so there's going to be so Trump and the Republicans will be able to remain in a strong position politically until the end of the next cycle. But we'll have to see if anything intervenes in the next few years, the next couple of years, to upset them. But I believe, and I will predict, that with the greater prosperity now coming into society, and the Iran war will come to a quick end shortly. So the Trump era will be very popular by its conclusion, and the vice president will be the next president because of that prosperity produced in these 4 years.
Well, everybody wants the captain of the ship to successfully port the ship. And I'm really looking forward to that prediction now. I don't think I've heard it often enough. And I'm hoping that we do have that prosperity we're all yearning for, and that success in the global arena as well, success in the global arena as well. And so be it. I mean, if Republicans prevail, let them prevail. Let them continue on the course of, because what we generally do is every 4 years we switch gears faster than a Yamaha. So if there's some consistency in policy, that could really benefit America too.
Yep. Well, consistency, I'm not quite sure what you mean by consistency. And
well, for example, like if we go from an extremely conservative approach and then switch gears to in 2 years from now, switch gears to an extremely liberal approach. Whereas if like you said, if your prediction comes true and we continue on the course of basically a more modified conservative approach, and America prevails and prosperity blossoms, I think we'd all be better off.
Yes, and prosperity promotes that. I mean, that's what the definition of better off means. But also, it's also a battle of words, and people may become prosperous and then agree, well, we are now so prosperous that we can afford certain things for the government to provide, and which is, of course, in general, a disaster. But it is the idea, it is the battle of ideas.
Yeah. Well, and that's what makes America great. I was actually watching Ronald Reagan YouTube reel, and he talked about the idea of disagreement was a big part of what makes America a great success.
Well, actually, now that you brought that up, there is the question of what does make America? Why is America great? Why is it that when you open the borders and 20 million people will come in all screaming into here? And why is it that America is so successful? Why is it that no country can even come close to the success of America? And the reason is because it's protected. The freedom of the individual is protected by the Bill of Rights and Article 1 in the Constitution of Section 10, I think it is, that contracts shall be adhered to, and that the Bill of Rights, the government can't come along and take your money, and the individual can talk as well as much as he wants. And and it's unreasonable, and forget it for unreasonable search and seizure. Forget it. The government can't do that. And so now that you have those enshrined in a Bill of Rights, you have the greatest country in the world because it allows individuals to promote their own freedom to do that which is best for their lives, which is principle number one. All life does that which is good for it. And so that's why America is great, because of the Bill of Rights. No other country has it.
No.
England has a little bit, but nothing like and most of those rights are only for members of parliament, but no other country has the Bill of Rights.
And that's a beautiful way to wind up, Chris, because you've really put it you've really bundled it in a great perspective that we've got this great way of life, we've got this great opportunity, and there's a lot of argument of how we should execute, of how we should present this opportunity and enable people to prosper from this opportunity. But you've made a great point to say that we're maybe on the right track right now.
Good, thank you.
You are the author of numerous books and also the host of the Philosophical Angle podcast. Tell me real quick about your books.
The latest one is, well, they're all available on wherever books are sold, and two of them are also audiobooks, The Nature of Aesthetics, and the latest one, The Nature of the Political Left and Right, and they're available anywhere books are sold.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much, Chris Angle. You've been incredible. I mean, this has been a learning experience. I mean, I love to think. I got to say, whenever we have this discussion, I always preface that this podcast in particular, Political No Brainer, isn't about knowledge, it's about wisdom. I love to find wisdom in a lot of people here have a lot of knowledge and a lot of AI now and a lot of Google searches, but wisdom is something everybody's yearning for. So I really think this has been an incredible podcast because it was all about a certain sense of wisdom, or it was wise. It was a great show. So thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. I'll be emailing you.
All right.
Thank you. Have a great day, sir. I got both your emails now.
Okay, good.
Have a great day, sir.
I know. Thanks. See you later.
See ya.